honored to be introducing our congressman today. My name is Megan Hess. I am a former staffer of the congressman, and one thing that I learned working in his office was the value of hard work. Congressman King runs his office the way every elected official should run their office, with constituent work, hard work, dedication to their constituents, and Congressman King really does that for Northwest Iowa in particular, and for our state. So, Congressman, thank you very much.
Thank you, Megan. Thanks a lot. It's really one of the pleasures of this job over the last years is to watch young people step in, see an opportunity, and take that opportunity and multiply it. And I appreciate the introduction and a lot of the things that you've done and will do, Megan. Jeff Smith here too. Thank you for being here to cover this today and representing us the way you do. We have, I'll leave somebody out, but I see the sheriff back there on the way in, so you'll check your ID when you leave. No, this is part of our good government. This is part of the town hall meeting where we all have an opportunity to have these discussions and meet with each other and exchange ideas. And I have the privilege of representing the 286 towns in the 32 counties in the 5th Congressional District. It is a big job, and whenever I think about 32 counties, I look at Chuck Grassley, who does 99 counties every year. And this new district that is laid out is 39 counties. And none of that is really daunting. The roads get better every year, and you learn how to do more things along the road, such as most of the time, I spend a lot of hours on the road these days, but that means I've got time to catch up on my email, my cell phone calls, and I'm going to miss the people in Southwest Iowa. They're good people with good projects, and we will stay with all of those down there, and we've made friendships that'll last for a lifetime. You know, the cell phone coverage is better up here, and it's flatter, and it runs flat all the way out to the eastern side of this new district, so I get a little more done on the road than I did when we were looping around in Southwest Iowa. So that's the bright side of that. I can give you a little bit of report on what's going on in Washington, and I will, and we're going to go to questions and comments on this, but first I want to mention where we are with the flooding along the Missouri River. I don't want anybody to forget what we're going through. Washington, D.C. had 2 natural disasters take place within the last couple of weeks. And one of them was an earthquake that put some significant cracks in the Washington Monument, that rattled a lot of things off of the shelf, in my office included, put a crack in the Longworth building where my congressional office is. I don't know that it put any cracks in the U.S. Capitol. We'll find that out next week when I get back. Then of course, the Hurricane Irene came along, and so double natural disasters on Washington, D.C., and they're busy cleaning up from Hurricane Irene as we speak. And FEMA has redirected some of their resources from places like Joplin, Missouri tornado on up to the East Coast to help with some relief with Irene. I don't take a big issue with that. They've got to put their limited resources where they're the most needed. And the press has asked me a number of times, am I not critical because Iowans didn't receive the individual disaster declaration that I asked for and that Governor Branstad asked for? We were turned down the first time with the first request, and now we're asking for an extension to put together an application for the second request. But I'm very well aware that FEMA relief is not going to do us a lot of good for individuals in the short term, because we're still underwater in the Missouri River bottom. And if you think of what that's like, pictures don't do it justice. You haven't seen a lot of pictures anyway. And I have flown it at least 4 times, most of the time all the time at low altitude, most of the time in a helicopter, and flown in, I believe, every mile of that river since it's been underwater, and a lot of it twice. What you'll see there isn't what you'll see from, you can't see it from the ground, it's underwater, but you can't see it from a boat, except the Coast Guard has embargoed boat travel on the flood. So I'm going to just describe it for you. If you go downstream from Sioux City, a typical stretch of the river right there near the Sergeant Bluff area and a little south is about 1.5 miles wide water. And as you go further south down towards Ottawa, Glencoe, it's 8 miles wide. And when you get just north of Omaha near the airport, then the water is 11 miles wide. I mean, this is a huge flood area. And then the levees bring the river back together through Omaha, Council Bluffs, Glenwood, and it opens up again and floods our bottoms for about 4 to 5 miles wide from Glenwood all the way down into Missouri. And I don't know how bad it is in Missouri. They're not telling me, and I haven't been there to see it. But this is a massive flood of historic proportions. It's more water than has come down the Missouri River in recorded history. Our previous high water mark was 1881. That was the year that they used as the model when they built the Pick Sloan program and built the 6 dams and the reservoirs in the upper Missouri. And they built it in order to protect us from flooding of the largest runoff that we'd ever experienced, 1881. 2011 eclipses 1881, and I have drafted legislation, and I've asked for support of our delegation, excuse me, the representatives that represent the Missouri River bottom in all of Missouri, Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, the Dakotas, and Montana, to sign on to that legislation. Some have, and we haven't had an opportunity to really work it yet because we're back for this August break, as we call it. And but anyway, the legislation does this. It amends the Missouri River Master Manual. Instead of going through a 14-year rewrite process that the Corps went through the last time they amended the Master Manual, we just amend it with a piece of legislation that says you shall manage the river, manage the reservoirs to protect us from serious downstream flooding, and do so to protect us from the greatest runoff ever experienced. So it's being written in a way that if next year we get more water, we'll get wet, we'll be flooded, but the Corps will have to adjust the water levels in the reservoirs. Each time we get more water, they've got to lower the level in the 6 pools so that they can store it. And it isn't like this hasn't been planned or strategized, and that we're asking the Corps to do something they can't do. It's more like this, that the overall storage is in million acre feet. If you take all 6 reservoirs, they will store 73.4 million acre feet of water. This year, we'll have more runoff than any other year. Altogether, all the runoff is 54 million acre feet by estimate. So you can see that. I mean, that's if we were going to store it all, and we don't have to. We dump a lot of it down the river. So it means instead of about 16.3 million acre feet of flood control storage, it's going to have to go up from there, some number approaching 20 million acre feet. Maybe a 25% increase in storage capacity, which would lower those pools in the 6 dams to protect us downstream. That's what we should be doing, and I think we need to do this while everybody's still underwater. Otherwise, the people in the Dakotas might forget that they've been flooded too. That's Missouri River, and I wanted to get that off my chest because I think that with all these natural disasters and with the earthquake and the hurricanes, they forget that we're still underwater, and we're underwater from hill to hill. We've been underwater since the 14th of June at least, and we're going to stay underwater at the end of September, maybe even into the next month. It's pretty heavy. So that's the piece of the natural disaster side. I look around the countryside though, and certainly we've got some crop that isn't as good as we had hoped it would be in June, but on balance it is green from horizon to horizon, and I'm really happy with what we've done agriculture-wise over the last few years here. There's a lot of capital that's been built, and that capital has sustained us through these uncertain economic times, and if we can hold our land values together, it'll sustain us through future uncertain economic times. The history of what's happened in Washington in this year is just bringing you up to speed with things most of you already know. There were about 3 major debates that took place in Congress. One of them was a continuing resolution debate about how we would fund the continuation of the funding of government, which was scheduled to expire at midnight March 4th. I was not satisfied with how that debate turned out. I believe that we should have shut off all funding to implement or enforce Obamacare. I worked hard for that. I fought for it. I thought we were in a position to get that done, and wasn't able to, wasn't able to encourage enough people to take that stand. And so instead it shifted over to an effort to try to provide a $100 billion cut in spending that would get us closer to a balanced budget, which is out of control, you know. Well, the $100 billion in cut got reduced to $61.5 billion, then $38.5 billion, then a number that's embarrassing. In other words, we didn't succeed very much. And watching our national debt accumulate to the rate of about $3 billion a day, if you're going to debate for 40 days about cutting the budget for $38 billion, you saw the national debt go up $120 billion while we're talking about it. If the national debt goes up at that pace, what good did it do us to have the debate? Well, we slowed down the projected growth a little bit. I remember getting tired of hearing that in the 90s. And we need to be straight with you on what's going on. So I voted no on that. And then we had the Ryan budget, and it's what it's commonly known as. The Ryan budget, although it addresses some very difficult problems we have, It also didn't balance for 26 years. 26 years. And Marilyn and I have 3 grown sons. They're in their 30s. And if we had stuck with the Ryan budget, I would be saying to them, hey guys, you might have worked a couple of years under a balanced budget when you first started out here when you were early 20s, but after that, you're not going to see the federal government balance its budget until you're ready for retirement, until you're knocking on the door of Social Security and Medicare. That's not good enough to tell the younger generation that we have set the stage for national debt to accumulate to the rate of, well, you see under the Ryan budget, $23 trillion in 10 years, and grow from there beyond until 26 years down the road it would balance, and then we could presumably pay the first dollar off on the national debt. That was the Ryan budget. Well, the debt ceiling debate adjusted that, and had we done no Ryan budget, had we done no debt ceiling debate, the trajectory of our spending, the baseline spending, would go to $28 trillion in national debt, from $14.3 trillion as of the first of this month to $28 trillion 10 years later. That's the baseline spending projected trajectory debt, $28 trillion. So roughly double in 10 years. My little granddaughter, Reagan Ann King, came into the world less than a year ago, owing Uncle Sam $44,000 as her share of the national debt. And by the time she's 10 years old, 5th grade, she'll owe Uncle Sam $88,000. $44,000 to $88,000 in her share of the national debt. And that's just the first 10 years. And then it goes on. We've got to get to the point where we balance a budget. And the debt ceiling deal, which was touted as a $2 trillion cut, never was a $2 trillion cut. It's a reduction of the increase in our projected debt, reduced from $28 trillion projected in 10 years to only $26 trillion. And I'm just not very pleased by that. I think we have to do a lot more to be fiscally responsible in our time and not pass this off on our children. Living on borrowed money to live a lifestyle that maybe we haven't earned. If we can't pay for it, I'll argue we haven't earned it. And I want to see our children and grandchildren succeed and have an opportunity that they're not digging out from underneath debt that we piled on them. That's the long and the short of the economic side of this thing and what I've seen. When we go back to Washington, the other side of Labor Day, the first debate will become, and it'll be consuming probably the entire month of September, how do we now fund the government beyond the end of the fiscal year at midnight September 30th? That is going to be another one of those debates that likely will end up with a similar result of the debates that we've been involved in. And I'll be pushing with the same philosophy that I have. And unless, of course, you can convince me today that I've been wrong all along, and in that case, I'll shift my gears. But that's the economic piece. I talked about the floods. I'm happy to have spent most of the month of August in Iowa. It is, I'm already homesick for Iowa, and I haven't even left for DC yet. But I love the chance to challenge things out there, and you all give me the fuel in my tank to go back and take the people on that a lot of them are put us in deep debt and undermining America. We've got to strengthen her in every way we can. It happens here in these communities, and then it matriculates up to Washington, D.C. Senator Johnson, thanks for joining us. I see you also in the crowd, and if I missed any other elected officials or appointed officials, I hope you all speak up for yourselves. In any case, that's a very short monologue for me to give, and I think it's a good time for us to turn this over to questions and comments, and I want to hear from you. And we are, when you do ask the question or make your comment, if you could introduce yourself, that's helpful to all of us, and we've got some people also taking notes, so if it looks like I'm not paying enough attention, they'll have it in the notes and we'll review. I want to hear what all you have to say. Whoever would like to go first, ma'am.
Well, thank you for taking me first. I appreciate that. My name is Ramona Bose. I'm a retired teacher. My husband is a retired military officer. We currently live in Milford and support you 100%. I also want to say how excited I am that you are on our news broadcasts more and more often on national TV. I think your name is getting out there, and I appreciate that because you have a very conservative point of view, as do my husband and myself. I have a couple questions, but I will just offer you one. You discussed the national debt, and in all of the programs and all of the items that have been offered to reduce the national debt, the military seems to be one of the agencies that is receiving very serious attention on being cut drastically. My husband, being a retired military officer, has had his pay frozen for the last 2 years, which, if you want to look at it, that could be considered a pay cut for 2 years. In all of these proposed budgets for, or proposed plans, I should say, for taking care of the national debt, it appears that they are going to possibly use the backs of retirees to help control where the money goes. It appears that in most of these COLAs and other items offered for the military are either going to be frozen or reduced. And my concern is not so much for us, but even for the young people who are going into the military. How are we proposing to keep them on? We train them, spend millions and millions of dollars to train them, and then they leave because there's nothing being offered because it is being cut. What is your proposal for military, and how is that going to work for the future? What are you going to do for us?
Well, first, I want to thank your husband for serving our country, everyone who has. My philosophy on this is that if we made a deal with our service personnel, a deal's a deal. And whatever might get changed going into the future can't go backwards on an agreement that we have now. The frozen COLAs, truthfully, I've heard very little about that, and I need to pay more attention to that, because that sounds to me like us not following through. If we had done that on Social Security, I mean, I know that there's a difference between freezing a COLA and having the COLA not produce an increase.
Right.
So I want to look at that and make sure that I'm operating off of a, independent fact base on that. A lot of seniors haven't received an increase, and in fact have received a little bit less in their check because the COLA didn't produce the increase, and they've had a actual increase in fee in one of the insurance policies as part of it. But I don't want to go back on the deal. I think that that's locked in. If we have an agreement with our military personnel and they've retired under those conditions, you don't change that. But, so I want to hold that, and I think we have to live with it. The second piece of it is that if they're going to reduce the retirement benefits, it does affect recruiting. And I can't at this point make a call on what I think is right and wrong and what affects, I can do that, but I can't give any kind of prediction on how proposed changes might affect recruiting. That's something I think they have to look at the results of it nationwide and see when they tweak it what happens one way or the other. But we're extending unemployment benefits for 99 weeks. We're paying for a lot of that out of borrowed money, borrowed from the Saudi Arabians and the Chinese, and half of the money, by the way, is borrowed from the American people. And I think you get a lot better benefit out of paying people to do things than you do out of not, paying people not to do things. And so if I have my priorities will be, let's hold our funding together better for our military, and let's put some more Americans back to work that are currently being paid not to work. And I'm very worried about the setup that we have under this super committee of 12. I disagree with the super committee. I think it's a bad model to follow, that each of us have been elected to represent approximately the same number of people. And when you put 12 people in a room, their instinct is going to be, and I don't know exactly how it's going to function, but their instinct is going to be, close the door, don't let anybody in. We are the brains now, and we will decide for all the rest of you what is good. And if Dave Johnson remembers what came out of the room on the hog confinement bill, that was 12 people that got put into a room, closed the door, and they first took an oath that they wouldn't talk about what was going on inside the room. And so you couldn't lobby them, you couldn't amend it, you couldn't slip a note under the door. They were offended if you even tried to do that. And what happened was, this is my memory now, when that bill came out, they said it's as good as it can possibly be, you have to vote for it, pass it up or down, but don't try to change it because we are the experts. We are the sanctified experts inside the room, the apostles of the 12. And if I remember right, there were 92 amendments filed on that bill in the Senate. And I remember one of them, and I filed, was just to fix the typos. So I'm for open government. I want full-throated voice representation, and the Republican form is guaranteed in our Constitution. And you know, that's where I'll keep pushing on this, but it's that legislation, the super committee sets up a cage match, I call it. And it's half out of entitlements, half out of military, so to speak, and you put them in a room, and it's kind of a do or die situation. I'd like to see that instead be assigned back to the committees that have jurisdiction and go and find the reductions that are prudent, that are selected in that fashion, not out of the 12 people in that room. So I'm apprehensive about what's coming. And another thing I'm concerned about is the balanced budget amendment, the vote that's required on the balanced budget amendment. That amendment's not defined as anything other than a balanced budget amendment. So it could just be, thou shalt balance the budget, even if it includes raising taxes, and you can spend any amount of the GDP you like. That's what I'm afraid we'll end up with, is a vote on something like that. And of course, if that's the case, I'll vote no. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
My name is Marlon Voss, I'm the mayor of the city of Astoria. And I just wondering about, with the postal offices closing, what can be done to keep them open? What are you doing to keep them open? I know there's offices in every county in your district that are looking at being closed. Are we doing anything to try to keep them open?
Well, yes, this is pushing a big rock uphill, and they drop it on us without a lot of lead time. I mean, it turned out to be. Does anybody notice that when you hear from the Postal Service that there's going to be a dramatic change in services, that it's something that it's already in motion before the media figures it out? They have about as tight a lips of anybody I know in the whole country, the U.S. Postal Service. 62 communities are on the block for losing their post office in the communities, and we are working and seeking to do that at least with every single community. We looked at it and we thought we could do a blanket plan and try to approach all of it, but I don't think that that's really appropriate. Each community has a different circumstance, a different amount of business and a different need. And so I know that our staff has sent a letter out to everybody in the 62 post offices and reached out to 62 communities, reached out to those communities, asked for that input. And we're trying to tailor a response with all of you individually. And I don't know where this comes. On top of that, we've got the battle of Sioux City potentially losing its postmark and a processing center. All these things, and it was a stronger argument that we had 5 years ago when that attempt came. We'd have a stronger argument today, except we're watching those reductions in the market share or in the actual traffic of our post offices in each of these towns. And when you see a 25% reduction in business, something's crunching, and they have made a decision at the national level that the processing centers will go from 500 to 200. Now that doesn't affect Astoria directly, but that's part of the magnitude of all of this is just crunching in on us, and we're trying to push back, recognizing that we probably can't, and I'll just say, I don't believe we can keep them all open. So if we can't do that, and I'm not ready to concede any individual one yet, we need to work to keep the service there as timely as it could possibly be. And all of those are pieces of the individual community formulas that we're trying to work out in all 62 in the district. And it is, I'm here to hear your advice too.
I've got an article I'll show you when we're done here. It's written by Representative Ray Hall from West Virginia. It's a pretty interesting deal. Do you know him at all?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I got an article written from him. I didn't bring it in with me, but I'll get a copy to Andrea or something. She can get it to you.
I appreciate it. Andrew will see to it that I see it. And they have a lot of rural communities in West Virginia, and in a similar type of a situation, and it matters a lot. And when you look at people that get their prescription drugs in next day mail, the timeliness of that, doing business for myself, I spent my life in the construction business. It was really nice for me to have an office in my home out in the country where our shop is, but when we were bidding projects and I needed to get them postmarked in order to get the bid in on time, they had to have that postmark at that time. I needed to be next to a post office that had that service. So we actually moved my administrative office operation into the town of Overbold so we could be within a few blocks of the post office. I just tell you that because everybody's got their story on how important it is, and I don't want to lose the service. Thank you. Yes, sir.
I'm Jerry Crew, No-Till Farm from Webb, and since I got the floor, I got a couple of questions. First one has to do with the flooding in the Missouri River. Now, we've heard rumors that the Army Corps of Engineers really mismanaged the thing for flood control because they were providing habitat on the basis of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. My second question is on budgeting. When are we gonna get back to some sanity, and when a decrease is really a decrease and not just really a less of an increase?
Well, the first one on the river, Jerry, is, I looked at all those numbers that I could get my hands on, and the Corps of Engineers didn't appear to equivocate or delay. I mean, that's a lot easier to get the full report from the Corps of Engineers on all the runoff and the snowpack accumulation and all the data they have back to the beginning of fixed loan than it is to get the plan from the Postal Service on why they're gonna close the processing center in Sioux City. No kidding. And, so I've looked through that and I paid attention to the river, and I've flown it and floated it and fished it and bid construction projects on it and watched the flow in the river. And I've long had maps of the river all the way up and down Iowa and to South Dakota, to Evans Point anyway. What I see is that first there's an American Thinker article that was critical of the Corps of Engineers, and it seems to be bouncing around the internet. Now, I have not taken it, I've read it, I've not taken it apart piece by piece, but it alleges that there was a snowpack in January and in February that was a huge snowpack that was 500% of normal, I think it was, and that the Corps should have known that at the time. I've looked at their data, it doesn't show that, and as far as any independent verification of that allegation, I can't find that. What I see is that I think the Corps got caught not knowing that, that they got caught with an unusual weather turn here. They did manage the river according to the way it was prescribed under the master manual. It's always been 16.3 million acre feet, and they dialed it down to that level on March 1st. That's the beginning of the spring runoff season, roughly March 1st. But then they had spring rains in the plains, and lots of them, that ran off and saturated, and late March and early April snowfall that was way beyond what could be anticipated. Now that sets the stage for a lot of runoff, and then on top of that came 8 inches of rain on May 22nd in Billings, and 10 to 12 inches of rain across a lot of that basin area at the same time. And that was May 22nd, that it was like all of this snow that had to come down sometime, coupled with all of this rain in the basin area of the Missouri River that saturated the soil and was coming down. On top of that came that huge rain, and it all came at once. That was May 22nd. On the 26th of May is when they announced that they were going to have to release 150,000 cubic feet per second. So we'll keep looking at that, asking the question, what did the Corps know and when did they know it? If we can identify that they should have known, I definitely want to look into that. But what I've done is looked at it and said, what should they have done? If they had decided to lower the water level in the 6 reservoirs that were up there to accommodate for this flood, they would have had to have been clairvoyant, in my view. So we can, though, now require that they lower it to those levels into the future. And we're under a lot of water. Now, I've talked so long about that, I forgot the second question.
Budgeting process at the fiscal level.
Now I know. I'd like to get there right away. It's embarrassing to me to stand here and tell the people of Northwest Iowa that the thing that is being called a cut or a reduction is really a reduction in the increase. I mean, we're going to cut spending, and we're going to not be at 28 trillion, but 26 trillion national debt in 10 years. That's a reduction of the anticipated increase in the national debt. And it is actually as a cut in the spending rate increase, but if you had to sit down and sell the banker on a loan using that kind of lingo, I have a feeling that you're going to be shown the door. So I don't like this at all, and I want to get it back to reality, and I hope we'll be able to elect some folks that will come in and help with that, and I hope we can elect a president that will be a big help with that.
Can that be done by a congressional edict with the Republican president?
The answer would be yes, if we had the will to get that done. If leadership wanted it done, and in this climate, I don't want to promise that there's a path to get something like that accomplished. And what I really think is that we're going to have to fight like crazy to keep this debt from growing very sharp and very fast. There's a push that comes out of the White House to spend more and more money. I want to spend less and less, and we're going to do all we can do to get the changes we can make, including compromise, the end of this year, into next year, 3, 4, 5 months. The other side of that, it's gonna be a better investment to bet on the new people that will come to Washington. That's how I'm looking at it today, Jerry. Thanks. Next, yes, sir.
Thank you for coming to Spencer. My name is Todd. I live here in Spencer. My question, first I have a comment, second I have a question. First, I appreciate your support of FEMA because my mother lost her house in the Joplin, Missouri tornado. And I grew up there, and a lot of my friends and family are using the help of FEMA right now, and we greatly appreciate it. My question is about taxes and regulation. If lowering taxes and decreasing regulation helps create jobs, why have we had a net decrease in job creation since the previous Republican president administration?
Why have we had what again?
A net decrease in jobs.
A net decrease in jobs. Well, it's not the only thing, and it's not a certain formula. That history has shown during both the John F. Kennedy administration and Ronald Reagan's administration that a reduction in taxes was an economic stimulus that resulted in not a reduction in revenue. But you can go a ways down on that scale, and at some point it's a diminishing return. If you took taxes to zero, of course you wouldn't have any revenue. And then what you have, if you play a little Sim City, you can figure out you don't have law enforcement, you don't have roads, you don't have infrastructure, the economy can't grow. So there's that balance, and it isn't necessarily a formula, but we're looking at what percentage of the gross domestic product should go to government, what percentage should go to the federal government. And the number that we settled on in the balanced budget amendment that I voted for that came out of the Judiciary Committee was 18% of GDP. So that's part of that equation, and there are many other factors that are at play too. And we saw what happened in the fall of 2008 when Henry Paulson had what I called his Chicken Little Day, when he went to Washington and said, the sky is falling, you need to give me $700 billion right now, no strings attached, and I will go out and pick up the toxic debt and see if I can save currency and credit for the world. That's the composite of the argument that he made. There's a crisis in capital. There was that TARP funding did get approved, and I voted no on it. Then along came the economic stimulus plan, $787.5 billion, which says, this puts the argument to the Keynesian theory rather than the supply side, that if borrowing money and handing it over to ask people to spend it stimulates the economy, why then doesn't the, let's say the Obama economic model bring about success? We have spent some $2 to $3 trillion in excess of what one might have anticipated, Jerry. It's hard to even pin down these numbers. And what do we have to show for it? Well, we've got to show an economy that's stagnant and an economy that's not very prospective into the future. But I think what we have here, Todd, this is, what I think is going on is this classic struggle that goes on between the Adam Smith, Milton Friedman type of the economy where lower taxes and low regulation, keep the government out of the way, let people invest, earn, save, and invest, and let the entrepreneurs grow this economy, the private sector growth. That's the side where I am. And that's the part of the half of the struggle. The other half of the struggle is the Keynesian approach, to borrow money and get it out into people's hands and get them to spend it to stimulate the economy. I think that people that believe that this is a consumer-driven economy exclusively are wrong, that it has to be driven by production. And we have to produce goods and services that have a marketable value, both here and domestically and abroad. If we do that, we'll compete with the rest of the world. Where you build things is where jobs are, and our economy will recover. And I think that now we have so much national debt, it's like a business being under the load of too much debt that you have to pay the interest and you have to pay the principal, and that comes essentially out of the profit compared to a company that wouldn't have debt. How do we do that? How do we sustain that and service that debt? It's going to be a long, hard slog getting out of here, in my view. But I also said, back in 2008, we will weather it here as well as anyone, because we're tied to the land, and Lord knows we've got good equity in the land now, and that's another long story. But do you have a follow-up on that? Did I give you an answer that comes close to the reason you asked the question, Todd?
I appreciate your philosophy. Can I narrow my focus on the question?
Anything you want.
From 2000 to 2007, taxes were lowered in 2001, and there was not a net increase in jobs. Why?
Actually, the 2001 taxes really wasn't much. That was a more or less a little sugar high stimulus plan. 2003, 28th of May, was the second round of what we refer to now as the Bush tax cuts. And that did lower the rates. And a lot of us believe that it isn't just jobs. I think Republicans get this wrong too. And how many times have you heard Republicans say, where are the jobs? It usually is, the prelude usually is, Speaker Pelosi, where are the jobs? President Obama, where are the jobs? And I hear that and I think, you know, it takes profit to pay wages. You have to have profit in order to hire people. So first thing is, where are the profits? And I think it's what we had happening during that cycle, that period of time. And it always gets muddled by competing forces and other factors that we don't roll into our formula when we analyze it. But here's the version of how I see the big picture of what happened. That we had a dot-com bubble that was created because of the growth in the technology industry. We learned how to store and transfer information far more effectively than ever before, beyond our imagination of 20 years earlier. Then there was a lot of capital that was invested speculating on that ability. And you had dot-com companies that were blossoming and growing. Silicon Valley, for example, would be one of those places. But as the economy grew, it was a speculative dollar, and that bubble was going to burst because it had to adjust for the real value of the technology, which was what gives us the ability to produce those goods and services more efficiently than before, and some recreational value too. So the bubble was going to burst. I believe it was pierced by the lawsuit against Microsoft, but it would have burst anyway. So I don't name as much the lawsuit in that. As the dot-com bubble was bursting, remember we had those great growth years in the mid-90s when we had balanced budgets. And as that bubble was bursting, Alan Greenspan was looking at this thinking, we need to create some kind of an economy to fill the hole. And so they lowered interest rates and put incentives out for people to buy homes and build homes, and they created a housing market. That housing market got overgrown over time, and as that was setting up, we saw that housing market come crashing down in a lot of areas just within the last 3 years. And in the middle of all this, the dot-com bubble bursting, the housing market being grown to try to fill that hole, our financial centers got hit 10 years ago next week, and we watched as we took a terrible financial hit as well as a human loss hit, along with the growth of the TSA and all the national security and going into 2 wars. All that was in the middle of all this time. And so, you know, in the end, I think that you and I could sit down and talk this thing through for a long time and come to the agreement that neither one of us quite has the full handle. But
I
appreciate your question on this. On balance, I don't want government to take too much because it discourages the people that produce. That's really the bottom line in me. And I want to have lower regulations than we have. SBA came out with a number last September 10th that is, our regulations cost us $1.75 trillion a year. And, you know, how can you sustain a load like that? Just yesterday morning, if somebody has a question, wave your hand and I'll stop talking, but unless I'm close to the answer end. But just yesterday morning, I had kind of a surprise. I knew they were coming someday, but the surprise visit of the people that are putting new siding on my house after all the hailstorms and years that we've had. And so I had 3 minutes to get out the yard, and I thought I should talk to them very quickly. So I just went out there and said, "Hi guys, welcome here. All right, you know, how are you?" And I don't imagine we need to talk about anything because you can spend today stripping all the old siding off. Well, no, we can't. We can't do that because the regulations require that we put all the plastic and containment down in case of lead-based paint. And so we can only do one side of the house at a time, because we have to pull the siding off of this side, we have to collect all that, we can't lose a crumb. And when that's done, we put the siding up on this side, and then we'll go to the next side of the house and the next side. We have to do it. And I'm thinking, you know, our kids are all raised in, I don't remember chewing on the outside of my house. And if they had, I would think there's more wrong with them than the lead. So that's just an example of the way that it costs me more money and everybody more money to do a simple job like that because of all the regulation. I know that wasn't part of your question, but it's part of the government load. Yes, sir.
I'm wondering, what chance do we have of getting some of this industry back into the United States? General Electric just went to China.
You give them a no federal tax bill and they go to China. That's true. Well, how do we get them back and how do we keep them from going? Well, regulation is part of it. And labor costs in the other countries are part of it, and does the freight offset the labor costs? Here's what I'm for, and I've been for this for a long time. I'm for a national sales tax. I'm for abolishing the personal and the corporate income tax and the estate tax and that whole list. I want people to be able to earn, save, and invest all that they can. And in doing so, then you have to make a decision on when you pay your taxes, when you make that purchase. I mean, this is a well-thought-out, long-time policy called the fair tax. And I was for it before anybody had drafted a bill. I came to this conclusion, working things out on my own. But here's it comes down to this. The products that are made in the United States have embedded within them about a 22% federal tax rate. That's payroll tax, corporate personal income tax, however the structure of the company is. And so your $1 widget costs about 88 cents and the balance, or 78 cents, and the balance of that goes to taxes. It's built into the price. And because corporations pass that through to the end user, the consumers. If we pass the fair tax, go to a national sales tax, competition drives that embedded tax out of the products we make here and gives us, that results in a 28% marketing advantage, US products made versus in any other foreign country. And a 28% marketing advantage means jobs stay here, companies come back here, America becomes the destination country of choice of investment capital. If we can do that, we can turn this thing completely around.
Can we get it done?
I've been saying we can get it done for a long time now. But what I've said, here are the conditions. It's going to take either a president who runs on it and it's a mandate, or it'll take an economic crisis where we're really digging for solutions. We had that crisis, and we ended up with the Keynesian economist. If that had been somebody that was for the fair tax, we would have that now, and I don't think we'd have this economic problem we have now. That's the big piece of the solution. There's a number of other things to do on the smaller scale. Yes, sir.
I'm going to go off the bubble a little bit here. What are your views, and this is a two-pronged thing, I've got personal interest in there. Immigration, is it more of a state issue or a federal issue? And then two, the drug battle that all law enforcement faces in this country. We're never going to win it. What's your viewpoint on that? Do we legalize and tax it, or do we keep beating our heads against the wall like we are now?
Well, I guess I know your position, but I have the two-pronged question. First is, on the immigration part of this, we have to have the help of local law enforcement. It has long been a standard practice for you to cooperate with every level of law enforcement that is practical to cooperate with, and vice versa. It's clearly a case of the local government has the authority to enforce immigration law. I could dig out some cases out of my BlackBerry right here that give the whole rendition of that. It's a primary federal government responsibility. It's primarily the federal government's job to pass and enforce immigration laws. When the federal government fails to do that and resists that idea, then I believe that the states need to do what they've been doing, and that's step in and pass those immigration laws, and then help enforce it. And it saves money along the long run if they're enforcing those. But the federal government has fallen far short of enforcing immigration law. And I have been in the business of seeking to embarrass the administration into enforcing immigration law for some time. I did so under the Bush administration, and actually I've pushed it less with President Obama there than I did with George Bush there. But on the drug side of this, I'm not ready to go there with legalization. William Buckley talked about it, and he makes some compelling arguments. And when I deal with the Mexicans, and I do go down there once in a while, and they come and visit me, I know they're going to tell me, we wouldn't have this drug and violence problem in Mexico if you didn't have the demand in the United States. And that whatever we might try to do to control the border, those drugs are in such great demand, they will find their way into the United States somehow. And the drug enforcement people will tell me that on the low side 80 and on the higher side 90% of the illegal drugs consumed in America come from or through Mexico. And so there are a number of things I want to do. It's not just the drugs, but it's part of it. But we do need to enforce our immigration laws. And I've long advocated build a fancy wall and a fence. And people will say we can't build 2,000 miles. Well, let's see. The Great Wall of China is 5,500 miles long. I think we could. I don't say we necessarily should. Just build it till they stop going around the end. And Also, we have to expand the ports of entry so we're more efficient, we've got better surveillance, and the traffic isn't slowed down so much there because there's legitimate commerce that's got to go through. On the legalization side of this, I would want to take a look at some of those countries that have legalized and see what they actually have, what it's done to humanity in the communities that are those addictive personalities. And I don't know enough about that. I'm just not ready to take that step. If others want to make that argument, I'm willing to listen. But there's that tension between, even if we enforced our immigration law, or excuse me, if we enforced our drug laws here, we can't get this shut down in this country until we get a new stigma out and the societies and the culture start to turn that back the other way. As long as the demand's here, the Mexicans can do all they can do, but they can't stop it. They can slow it a lot, but they can't stop it. And it is a very difficult conundrum that I think you recognize probably better than I do, sir. Yes, sir.
Ron Newman, Congressman King, from Okoboji. Along that same line, I've traveled somewhat in Europe, and it seems that we're one of the few countries in the world that has the philosophy that our military should now protect our borders. I wonder what your thoughts would be on using the National Guard on our borders for more than just administrative purposes.
Well, I'm ready to do that. I've long been ready to do that. I think we should have the resources to control our border. And what a good training ground we have. We find our troops fighting in areas where the terrain looks a lot like it does down our southern border. We flew over some of that down on the Arizona border a few years ago, and some of you will be familiar with Congressman Mike Pence of Indiana. And I went on the intercom and I said, look down there, you know what that looks like? And he thought I was going to say Iraq, and I said it looks like Indiana. But no, it does. It looks a lot like Iraq. And there's some discussion about changing the Posse Comitatus law so that our troops could enforce law internally, domestically. I'm closer to that than I was a few years ago. I'm not quite ready to call for that, but I can see the merits in it. And here's this thing. This is frustrating to me, though, that I occasionally will do surprise trips down to the border, and I'll drop in at a port of entry, and I'll learn as much as I can before I have to tell them who I am, and then I quit learning things pretty quickly. But they're down there. I was there with the Shadow Wolves. They're a Native American enforcement team out of Sells, Arizona, the Tohono O'odham Reservation down there, and they caught he was an MS-13 drug smuggler with about 240 pounds of marijuana in a false bed underneath the pickup. And we cut that pickup open with the jaws of life, and I carried, I think, every one of those bags out of there and stacked them up by the scale. Policy down there at the time was that unless you had more than 250 pounds of marijuana, you were not prosecuted. And for a while, in some of those areas, 500 pounds was the threshold. So what they would do is send a sacrificial MS-13 fella through there with 240 pounds. If he got caught, no problem, but it was a diversion. Meanwhile, they'll run a truck through that's got a ton or more of marijuana in it. That's the kind of thing that's going on. And I'm hearing constantly from the administration that they don't have the resources to enforce the law. And yet, I remember at no time that they've come to the Judiciary Committee and said, we need authorization for more judges, more prosecutors, more prison beds. And so we get a lot of Border Patrol agents there, and I go down and see them, and they tell me their frustration with having made arrests where as many as 2,200 pounds of marijuana, and they can't get anybody to prosecute it because they don't have time to do the prosecution. We need to tool ourselves up to enforce the law down on the border and make sure that there's a level of certainty that they'll be prosecuted when they are interdicted. And that would help a lot with actually it'd raise the price of the drugs here, wouldn't it, officer?
More than likely.
If we do a better job of interdicting, but there's kind of how I think about it. Thank you. Anything else?
I don't want to monopolize, but I got a third question, I guess it is.
I'm always worried when you have a question, Jerry.
Our favorite newspaper,
Huh?
when Michelle Bachmann announced, carried a quote in there from you. And quite frankly, I was kind of disappointed in your quote about not giving a wholehearted support to Michelle Bachmann at the time, because if there were ever two kindred spirits, to my knowledge, the only difference is that she's a Lutheran and you're a Catholic. And I wonder why you failed to support her at that time.
Well, I don't remember the exact quote that you're referencing, but I get asked that question, every 20 feet at the straw poll by the press that was there. And here's how I look at it. First, she is a great friend, and I have great respect for her. She's as smart as anybody I know, and as quick a study as anybody I know. She's well-grounded philosophically, and her instincts are better than anybody's I know. But what I have said that I'm not going to make an endorsement for the presidency until such time as we get into September. Part of that, and I'll just tell you, part of that reason is I am on a panel in Columbia, South Carolina on Monday. There's a debate down there that we've set up working with Senator Jim DeMint. We brought him into Iowa from March 26th in Des Moines, and clear back last January we put a strategy together, which was we want to try to tie together the values of Iowa in this nomination process to New Hampshire's, to South Carolina's, the first 3 states, and then if we can get it to work on into Florida. And so I'll be one of the people asking questions of the presidential candidates down there. That's consistent with a long-term plan that I put together. And when September or October rolls around, I said I want my head and my heart to come together, and I jump in with both feet. But it also is more than friendship. And I don't back away from my friends. This is about who will make the best president, and part of this process makes every candidate better. The crucible that they have to go through with the nomination process shapes them for the job. And if we just reached into Stillwater, Minnesota, or down to Texas or Massachusetts or wherever it might be, and pulled somebody out of their office or their job and set them in the Oval Office, they won't be near the president that they will be after they go through this whole nomination process. So, and she and I have talked about this, and so I think we're okay.
Anyhow, when I read the response, I thought, that's a politician's answer, and I don't consider you a politician.
That's a fine compliment, Jerry. So part of that is it's a practiced answer that comes. I have to give that answer whenever there's media around, and I've gone into more depth here with the debate in South Carolina than I have at any time up till this point. But that's impending, and we're planning along the way. I'm just deciding what kind of questions I'll ask of the candidates, and we want to